There are two answers. One is the earlier answer, which is when you get your document put together, your presentation put together, bring it to me, and I would say bring it to me 2 weeks in advance of when your first reading is scheduled. That way, I'll have time to go through all of the first reading documents for that round and make sure that they meet the simple test of the policy. Did this happen? Did this happen? Did this happen? I will not be reviewing it for my own kind of impression of, is this a good idea or not? I will not be reviewing it and then getting on the phone saying, hey, you over here, you've got to vote against this. You've got to, I'm not going to campaign with it. It's going to stay in my desk. But I will make sure that you've gotten all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed, and I'll give it back to you and say, this is missing. You may need to want to do a little more work. Okay, that's step one, 2 weeks before your first reading. If your first reading is already scheduled, you probably can back out the date you know. Any later than that, and I doubt that I'll be able to get through 5 churches worth of presentations in 2 weeks, or in less than 2 weeks. Yeah?
Can I say something? From the trustee's perspective, part of your settlement package should include the meeting of all current 2014 obligations. If the per capita hasn't been paid, it needs to be paid. If you have outstanding amounts due your pastor's retirement fund, monies due for your property insurance, property tax payments, don't forget that stuff, because once the property's transferred, we don't want to have a letter show up in the mail in September saying, oh, by the way, you owe us $1,000 for underfunded pastor pensions. So that's because PLR is going to be on the hook for that. So make sure you kind of covered all those housekeeping type bases as part of your final presentation.
Thanks, Lenny. Where the leadership figures in is, and this is where sort of trustees' participation / review figures in as well. Once it hits the first reading in Presbytery, so for some of you that date is April 24th, for some of you it's May 31st, for some of you it's June 7th, we are going to continue to schedule these things as close together as practically possible so that we can keep it moving along. Once the first reading has occurred, then there's sort of a stew about it period of 30 days. During that stew about it period, it seems appropriate to me, though it does not belong to me to make that call, for the leadership bodies to decide whether they want to comment on the recommendation as a leadership body. There are two things going on here. One is that anybody who is a member with voice in Presbytery has the opportunity to speak their wisdom on the matter. That will come at the second reading when debate and vote occur. But a body can weigh in as a body during the debate and vote if they have gotten together and formed an opinion as a body as well. And those of you who've hung out with General Assembly moments know that what happens is a presbytery brings an overture, and the overture to General Assembly is then run through an advisory committee that's affected by that or that has an opinion on that. And the advisory committee will include advice on what the GA should do with that overture. I'm suggesting we follow a similar process if the leadership team is inclined to. What I am not suggesting is that you will have to submit those joint resolution proposals to every team and get them signed off on by those teams before it ever comes to a first reading. That's not in the policy. Is that clear? Good? It may mean that the teams will want to schedule additional meetings, but that all belongs to them. So then, is there a specific milestone or action that must occur before the presentation can be given? The answer is, you gotta turn it in so that I know it's ready. That's the only real milestone. Or, the other milestone is it has to be done. You don't have to wait to schedule it if you're confident we're gonna be ready by this date. Tell me that when you're sure what that date is. In what form are the recommendation and the report of the JDT to be submitted? The question, There's going to be a legal document. That has to be part of it because the presbytery has to vote on something real. They can't vote on a, here's our plan, and the presbytery says, okay, we approve the plan. It's got to be real language because that's what the presbytery ultimately is going to be saying yes or no to. It's what the congregation and the session are ultimately going to be saying yes or no to. So that's the form, properly speaking, that has to be submitted in time for me to check it, in time for the first reading. You may want to consider some kind of PowerPoint as well. That's up to you. What is the preferred format and time limit for the JDT presentation to presbytery? Preferred format, I just addressed that. It's up to you. Whatever you think is going to sell it best. If it's clowns and balloons, by all means use it. Time limit. The council was of the mind that we could get through 5 presentations in 3 hours at the first of the first readings, because it would simply be presentation, Q&A, presentation, Q&A without debate. So I would urge you to plan your presentation to fit within that 2.5 hour, 3 hour time span without making life miserable for the folks who are at the end of the evening. If you go 2 hours, they're going to get short shrift. Remember your brothers and sisters. So council's mind on this is think about maybe 15 or 20 minutes of presentation at the most, and 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A. And we'll keep it moving along, and then the real meat and bones will happen at the second reading. Presentation slides, format, form, how and when submitted. I don't need to see those. If you want to turn them into me and have me comment on them, I'm happy to do that. May we presume that once we have presented, the presbytery members will actually vote, or will the vote be deferred, and if deferred, to when? That's that 30-day reading period. So it's presented, at least 30 days elapses, the next meeting is scheduled such that it can happen as soon as possible after that 30 days has elapsed. So first reading, just to make sure you know what's going on, or the presbytery knows what's going on. 30 days to figure out what they think about it. Then the second reading is when the debate and vote occurs. That answers the next question, which is the voting by presbytery to be done at the same meeting as the second reading? The answer is yes. Will the voting members of presbytery be made aware of the entire process, including how the JDTs were formed, the training they completed, and all that was shared today, and by whom? No. We are not going to provide presbytery with a transcript quoting exactly which lines were spoken by Tom Kramer today. Now, yeah, we will quote Landon though. If the question really is, will the presbytery be given the broad strokes of how does this all go together, the answer is yes. Part of it will be the same over and over again, which is this vote occurred, these people were assigned, blah, 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 and then you pick it up from there. You know, I can write sort of the one that applies in every situation, but you all pick it up from, and then this is what we did with the assignment that we were handed, and the answer is yes, the voting members of presbytery should be made aware. I mean, this is going back to the training time in November. If you sing Kumbaya every time, put it in, because that's something that the presbytery needs to know. Will the presbytery counteroffer be developed as part of the vote, or will it be handed off to the trustees to come up with a counteroffer? That is up to the presbytery. According to Robert's rules, the body in deliberation always has the authority to refer a motion to one of its subordinate bodies. So it could choose to refer it to the trustees. But it is within the authority of presbytery as the deliberating body at the second reading, when it's doing the voting, to also offer amendments to the recommendation. And those amendments then would be included as, we approve it, but with these additional conditions. And then that approval with those additional conditions is what would be sent forward to the session and to the churches. Until just now, I have not entertained the idea of a referral to a committee to work out those kind of additional riders. I'll have to do some further thinking because it could be complicated. I'll do some further thinking on what that would look like in reality if it came to pass. But the presbytery, as a presbytery, through the power of making amendments, could, to use the language of this card, come up with a counteroffer. When will authorization be given, and to whom is it given? I'm going to need help with that one because I don't know what you mean by authorization. Do you remember writing this question? Yeah.
It came from JDT. My understanding of that question, Phil may have a slightly different version, but my understanding of that is that we wanted to know who is going to speak for Presbytery. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be Steve? Who is going to be the person who will give us the results of the vote?
Oh. Okay, so let me paint the scenario and make sure I've got it in my head. JDT brings a proposal. Proposal goes for first reading. Whoever it is comments on it. Proposal goes for second reading. Presbytery votes. Amendments happen or don't happen. There's a final vote of Presbytery that either endorses the recommendation, modifies it, or torpedoes it. Is that, okay, so, and the question is, at that moment between those three choices, who will announce what happened?
And who would authorize legal documents, right? Who would sign?
Oh, is that really the question, is who authorizes the legal document? Who signs off?
Well, we need an answer to both.
Okay, the answer to the first one is the norm in the deliberative work is that I would announce it after the tally has been taken. If there is a division of the House, we have to do ballot or whatever it is, somebody will tally, either maybe just by voice vote or hands or whatever. And then at the end, I would read back, this then is the action taken by Presbytery to approve this recommendation in its current form, or to approve it with the following amendments. That would be read into the minutes of the meeting of Presbytery. Now the next question is also actually here, which is, what about the legal documents? This is, how do I put it? There are a couple of things going on in this. This is where I'm going to slow you down a bit for the sake of clarity. It is my responsibility as corporate secretary to sign off on the agreement in the name of Presbytery. There will be some time that passes en route to that since the Presbytery votes. So the Presbytery votes, then it goes to the session and the congregation to accept the offer of Presbytery or to reject it. Those are their two choices, up or down. The session and the congregation have 90 days in which to do something about it, to accept or reject. If they don't do something about it within 90 days, it is as though they have rejected it. So there's that span. In order for this event not to slam the door on the congregation, the way that I'm going to encourage Presbytery to cast the vote is to accept the recommendation of the Joint Discernment Team pending acceptance by the session and the congregation of the church concerned. If we didn't do that, If the action of the presbytery was to dismiss the church according to the following terms, full stop, then at that moment, the church is out the door and those terms apply. Because we're back in that awkward place of it's not really a two-way street, it's the presbytery deciding what to do with the church's property. And if the congregation and the session find that unacceptable, they have no recourse. So the pending acceptance by the congregation and by the session at formal vote is your recourse if you're a part of the church. One of the questions before me that's already been put a few times is how much alacrity will I use in getting, let's say that the session of the congregation go, yep, we're good, we want to do this. How fast do I do it? This is a case of, it's like child baptism, without undue haste and without undue delay. I will not wait the full 90 days to leave entire opportunity for anyone who might be so inclined to file a remedial complaint. That's the formal window that they have. The other side of it, though, is that if that vote happens on a Thursday night, my Sabbath is ordinarily on a Friday, and I will not break the fourth commandment on behalf of this event. I would say it is reasonable to expect, depending on conferences, vacations, the Sabbath, what have you, that it would be a period of 2 to 3 weeks by the time I would sign that off. And my personal opinion is that anybody who wants or is inclined to file a complaint probably will get to it by then if they're going to get to it at all, and I will notify the presbytery accordingly. I think that answers those two.
Clarification.
Yeah.
But does that mean that the church should plan to present the presbytery with a legal document for presbytery's review?
Yes. Okay.
Forrest,
Uh-huh.
is the legal document we're talking about the recommendation that the session the presbytery approves, or is this a quitclaim document you sign later?
Oh, no, the former.
Okay.
Yeah, the quitclaim document is boilerplate. But what, at least what I was answering to Phil was, I would expect there to be fairly formal language in the document that the JDT presents to the presbytery for approval. Why don't I pause a minute and see if there are any comments pertinent to all this stuff from the board, and if not, 1 or 2 more answers to a couple of questions from you all by hand, and then 1 or 2 more answers to questions that are still outstanding that I intentionally left toward the end.
Forrest, one other thing that we talked about was in terms of the pending, that they were dismissed pending acceptance into another reformed body. So if a church is considering right now going, for example, to ECO, they probably should be doing the paperwork to make that acceptance happen even before we are ready to dismiss them. Yes?
Thank you, yes. We will not dismiss unless you have somewhere to go. Hand. Oh wait, actually I can't see behind. Any others? Okay, hand on the floor.
The legal documents, and I'm presuming you're talking about a legal separation agreement,
Right.
which would follow all of those. Without creating undue delay, would the presbytery and the individual congregations to have some standardization on those documents, so you don't have, I would think standardization would help the potential appeal process, right? It helps moving through sending things. Do you have thoughts on that?
The standardization you've received is the document from Neil Wells. I believe that all of the teams got a copy of that. It's fairly terse, no?
No.
Okay. Noted. I will have that sent out to all of you. Neil's version is really quite brisk, and you'll be filling in a lot of details, but what he does is he provides, here's sort of the basics that you can use then as a springboard.
And so that's officially approved.
No, nothing is officially approved until the Presbytery votes on it.
In terms of what we should do.
Yeah, I think it has the endorsement of the stated clerk.
Is there a copy available today?
No. But I can email it out to folks early next week. The question is, was there a copy of that legal document available today? Is that a hand? It is a hand.
Well, the churches in the first line wait the reading to get around to vote for the remaining churches. I'm wondering if there's a way in the process to make it where there's not a disadvantage for churches in the second wave versus the first wave.
That would depend on how fast sessions and congregations vote to accept the approved recommendation of Presbytery. The answer is maybe.
Seems like it changes the voting pool and so forth like that, but just thinking that it seems that it puts the congregations that are maybe not at first wave that are potentially disadvantaged.
The question is, will churches in the first wave be at an advantage compared to churches in the second wave because more of their counterparts are present? I'm going to push back a little on that. I think the presumption behind the question is that presbyters who belong to leaving churches will be disposed to vote in the interest of the local leaving church. And maybe it is idealistic for me to think otherwise. But there are two things here that come to mind. One is kind of the pollywonk answer, which is that it is the fiduciary obligation of a presbyter to vote what they believe to be best for the presbytery. And then secondly, and maybe more important, is it is our ecclesiology that we gather not to vote particular interests, but to seek together the will of God. I hope that whether you belong to the stayers or the goers, you keep that foremost in your mind, and that the result would be that the difference is immaterial when the votes come down. I've been idealistic for a long time. Yeah.
Isn't there a provision in Robert's Rules of Order whereby parties that have a direct interest in a vote must abstain?
No. There is a provision in Robert's Rules that says those who have a direct interest in the vote should recuse themselves. But it belongs to the person with the interest to do that. It does not belong to the body to insist on it. Any other questions from the floor before we go to a final couple behind me and then worship?
Just quickly, I'd like to speak to that question, but it goes back to several questions I think that all have sort of the same answer and sort of the spirit of the process, which I'm not the financial person, I'm more of the spirit of the process person. And that is that we all benefit from continuing to focus on what our shared common mission is, and that the how we do this is as important as what we do, because the outcome of how will significantly impact whatever the outcome is. So whether you're being dismissed or staying, whether you're on the fence about that or, concluded a long time ago where you were, the way we do this together and the ability we have to trust each other in the process, is excruciating as it is, and to be transparent about that, I think will contribute to the outcome being mutually as win-win as possible. And so I really plead with all of us to continue to remember we do have some very, very significant common interests. And the way we go about this will impact us whether we're together formally or informally. And even more importantly, will impact what the world sees in the way we do this, which impacts our mission for decades. And so I just would appeal again to the more, again, it's idealistic, but let's continue to keep our focus on that common mission, and how we do this will impact that, whatever the outcome is. Because we're certainly seeing a lot of places around the country we're not attending to that. Even though a congregation or a presbytery may have gotten what they wanted, they got much more than that they didn't want. And so let's really be attentive to that.
I'm going to take one or maybe two more questions and then close it up with my own pair here and worship. Jim.
Of course, I guess I gotta address the whole group. The biggest difficulty for all of us has been that this presbytery and the congregations within the presbytery that are seeking dismissal are not doing it because of the presbytery at all. The issue has been and remains constantly that it is GA and is the problem. But to say that we are not a disinterested person in order to be able to vote is just, we're all interested people in this situation. So we have to vote at the same time. I find difficulty with this last discussion on this issue, because as I sit here and there's no way I want to leave this presbytery per se, but because this presbytery's beliefs and conduct is spurred to my faith. But the GA is not, and it has not been for a long time. That's all I want to say.
I would not be surprised if that sentiment is shared within this room. Let me use that really as a springboard then to come back to the question about supporting theological beliefs with which we disagree. This is the one about paying to leave and supporting. If you're inclined to find this a dodge, you're going to find it a dodge. But it is part of ethical use of money as I understand it. I'm going to start with my own personal experience. I am, by a series of relations, which I shall not name in order to protect the guilty, related to some people who found it desirable to hide money from creditors during potential bankruptcy proceedings a few years ago. And one of the ways that they wanted to do that was to give a chunk of it to Karen and me. We refused. It's an interesting ethical dilemma, because the result is then that it ended up being given to people that we regarded as being even less ethically inclined in the use of that money than we would have been, and it kept it in the pockets of people who we thought were behaving unethically to begin with. But we wanted no part of money that we believe to be of unjust origin. When I think about the relationship of a church to General Assembly, where the church thinks of General Assembly as an unethical entity, I hope you'll see the parallel that I'm drawing. And this, again, is not speaking as a stated clerk. This is speaking as a pastor, and even more particularly as a person who has worked on his own sense of faithfulness for years and years. I hope you'll see the parallel that in your situation, what I hope that I would do is not seek to keep money from a church that has behaved unethically, but instead to very practically wash my hands of that matter by divesting my shared interest in that church. In other words, sitting down for the sake of my own ethics with my checkbook and saying, this is what you get from me, and we are no longer connected because I no longer have any financial obligation to you. And that goes well beyond what a court in the state of California would say about financial obligations. I'm essentially paying for my soul's freedom. Now, you can all guess that by virtue of the fact that I'm a stated clerk in a presbytery in the PCUSA, I'm not there myself. But I do have that kind of ethic, and if I were in that kind of scenario, would want to be talking with my fellow congregants about maybe whether, for the sake of the congregation and for the sake of our freedom spiritually from this mess, we pony up as congregants to be quit of this thing. And I'm not sure that that conversation has happened as much yet as it should, though I'll honestly acknowledge that I'm not in the congregations to be able to tell you, you are. But I'd at least want you to entertain that, even if it horrifies you that I've said it. Let me end then with one more question here, and then we'll give the guitar back to Steve, unless there are any last words over here. The last question of the morning here is, why do we feel like we are dealing with the temple money changers? I don't know why you feel that. I know that if I were in your situation, and I'm assuming this is coming from the perspective of church people rather than presbytery representatives. At least, if it's coming from a presbytery representative, I want you to talk to me because we got an issue. But if it's coming from church people, and if I were a church person, why would I feel that way? The answer that I would give is the temple money changers had a situation where there were no bargaining bits, right? You had to go through them en route to sacrifice. You didn't negotiate with them. They held all the cards. And like it or not, that's kind of how this thing is. The polity of the PCUSA is such that as far as if we think about it as negotiations are concerned, the presbytery does hold all the cards. And so would I feel in that scenario like I'm dealing with the temple money changers? The answer would be, at least as far as the question of power is concerned, I certainly would. I hope that in engagement today with these folks, you have seen people who are far more serious about the cause of Christ in the world than they are about turf. And I wonder if that's the way in which you aren't dealing with temple money changers. And I would hope, well, let me put it this way. Sometimes what we see is based on what we're looking for. And I wonder if a good Lenten exercise is to take kind of this stuff in Philippians 4, that whatever is lovely, whatever is honorable, whatever is true, whatever is just, think on these things. And if I got the list out of order, I'm sorry. What if we chose to do that about the other people in this room? Say, whatever is honorable about so-and-so, dwell on that. Whatever is true about so-and-so, dwell on that. Whatever is true about the person across the room, across the table from me, dwell on that. And it may be that the feeling that comes from dealing with the temple money changers lessens some because of the feeling of that is tilted by the fact that we're choosing to look differently. And again, if I'm one of the money changers, you may decide that I'm just, feathering my own nest even by saying that, but I recognize that quandary. Anything else from the table for the morning before we go to worship?
Yeah, I would like to respond to that also. The money changers looked different to different people. Cleansing the temple is in all four Gospels. Luke doesn't mention the money changers. My only point is that I think all of us have different views of what's happening. And I think it's not helpful when statements like this are made that say, we all see something a certain way. What I find is that experiences are not consistent. I would venture to say that there are some JDTs who would not describe their experience in that way. Could I even dare to ask for a hand of someone who would say it's not felt like encountering money changers? So there are some, and I've heard some groups talk about how their experience has been hard, but with a very good result. And so I'm getting heads nodding here also. So I just want to encourage you, if you've had a bad experience, you might talk with others if you're willing to talk with someone about that, if you'd raise your hand right now, do you see some folks who would be willing to share with you? I don't think that's been a universal experience. And I do think it's important some of you seem to want to speak for everyone. And the assumption has been all along that there is not a universal voice here, that congregations are coming on their own, and that this is not an organized campaign. I don't experience this as every church coming from the same perspective or feeling the same way. So I think we need to be careful about saying what we mean when we say we, and also realize that not everyone has experienced it as a bad experience. It's been hard. Universally, it's been hard and hard work. But in many cases, in a number of cases, I've heard stories of a very redemptive experience, and I'm thankful to God for that.